check out some of these photos I got in my first few months with the G9 back in 2021. Looking at them, there's just something I absolutely love about them. They're sharp, but they don't look too digital, yet they also don't look like film. There's just something so special about that 20 megapixel micro four thirds sensor and how it handles lighting, micro contrast, and color, and I feel like I've been missing that since I put the G9 down a few years back. The Lumix G9 was a fantastic camera when it first came out, and it was my go-to camera for a long time. I shot everything with it, from landscapes to paid client work. But how does it hold up years later? Today we're going to go revisit the Lumix G9 as well as the micro four thirds sensor and see how it holds up and compares to the shooting experience of quality top-of-the-line newer cameras. So, taking the G9 out for the first time in years, I instantly remembered one of my favorite parts of shooting micro four thirds, and that's the lens sizes, especially the kit 12-60 lens. I know it's a kit lens, but unlike other kit lenses, it's actually good. It's sharp, it's compact, and the zoom range is insane. It almost reminds me of my loved Tamron 35-150, a $2,000 lens. The fact that I can get an equivalent full frame range of 24-120 in a lens that's smaller than my Sony 35mm f1.8 prime is pretty amazing. Not to mention, lenses for the micro four thirds mount tend to be cheaper than full frame glass, another bonus. The kit lens isn't the only lens I own for this lens mount. As it got darker, I swapped out the kit lens for a 20mm f1.7, a 50mm full frame equivalent, to take advantage of the lower aperture, and this is really where I felt the limitations of the G9. The older contrast-based AF is even worse than I remembered. In well-lit conditions, it's good enough, but when the light fades, it struggles, even with subjects that don't move, like a cityscape. This honestly had me debating putting the G9 back down after only a day of use. That night, I was really excited to edit the photos. Now, I was disappointed with how many out-of-focus shots there was, but man, I remembered how much I love these RAW files. For whatever reason, I find that Lumix files really like to be pushed, especially the shadows, which makes editing them so much fun. I was also a bit surprised by the noise in the images. Shooting at ISOs of 64,000 in low light on this small sensor, I expected for the noise to be overwhelming, and when editing these files, it was better than I expected. Not great, but better. The next few days with the G9, I tried to focus less on getting perfect images and more on getting to know the camera again. Picking up the camera again was a surprisingly odd experience. A camera I once knew like the back of my hand felt foreign compared to my Sony bodies. It took time to get used to the Lumix body again. After all this time, I still don't love the dial placement as much as I love the dials on my A7 IV, but it's not a deal breaker, and I think in time I'd adapt further. The overall layout of the G9 reminds me a bit more of the Canon R6 Mark II, which I tried out and didn't love. I'll link that video below. By no means is the G9 a small camera, but the body of the G9 definitely felt lighter than my Sony A7 IV. This may just be due to the difference in lens sizes though. The build quality on the G9 is fantastic. It just feels sturdy. Even things like the flip out screen feel way stronger than on Sony and Fuji cameras I've used in the past. Going from Lumix to Sony, I didn't notice the build quality difference as much, but going back to the G9 from Sony, the G9 really stands out as a sturdy, well-built camera. After spending a few days with the camera and reintroducing myself to it, I found the G9 getting a bit easier to use. After I came to terms with its limitations, I saw where the G9 really started to shine. As I said before, the size and versatility of the lenses are great, but that's not the only thing. The IBIS is fantastic. I trust it as much, well probably more, than the IBIS on my A7 IV. The EVF is also great. It just feels comfortable in my eye with its large and clear screen. There's also plenty of customizable buttons, and I found myself absolutely loving the switch to move between AF modes. Honestly, every camera should have this feature. The typical button or sub-menu just can't compete with the switch that the G9 uses to switch AF modes. And like I said earlier, I just love the files this camera produces. I can't really place on my finger on why I do, I just do. I found some of my older editing styles coming out again, and I really enjoyed that. Maybe it's just a nostalgia, or maybe there's something more to it. I'll leave a few RAW files linked below so you can edit them and judge for yourself on what you think of the Lumix G9's RAW files. There's also a lot of features that many may find useful, but I never used, like the 6K high-speed burst mode and the high-resolution mode. These aren't for me, but maybe they're for you, and it's nice to know they're there if I ever need them. While the G9 does have a smaller sensor and outdated autofocus, it's still a solid camera for photography. As long as you know the limitations of the autofocus and the smaller sensor, I think you'll really enjoy shooting with the G9. You just really have to keep those limitations in mind when you're shooting with this camera. But what about video? Could the Lumix G9 still be a formidable video camera? The G9's older, highly respected brother, the GH5, was an amazing video focus camera when it first came out, and it still holds up on its own. But does the G9? The quick answer is yes, the long answer is it depends. The G9 still has the ability to shoot 10-bit color, which most cameras in its current used price range don't offer. The G9 also has the best video IBIS I've ever used. It feels way more natural than other IBIS systems I've experienced when it comes to handheld videos from other brands. You could also shoot in log for an extra charge. The optional Vlog L upgrade can be purchased for $100. All this considered, it's still a photo-first camera, and that means there's some big cons to the video shooting experience. The biggest con, in my opinion, is the 30-minute record limit. The G9 came out on the tail end of the 30-minute record limit era, and it's a big miss. If you want to shoot longer talking heads, this just isn't the camera for you. You'd have much more luck with the GH5 for a similar price, but more video capability. You'd have more luck with the GH5 that you could get for a similar price, but with no record limits. 30 minutes just isn't enough to film some of my longer projects, but if you can work within this 30-minute record limit, you'll still get very solid results. I just personally need a longer record limit for my cameras. If you're looking for more frame rate options, the G9 can shoot up to 4K 60, and this is really nice to have, but it also has its limits. This time, it's limited to 10 minutes. Now that bothers me less. Even my longest 4K 60 clips don't reach 10 minutes long, but the bigger problem is it's limited to 8-bit color, which is really a bummer. Not the end of the world, but 10-bit color is so much better. So, while the G9 wouldn't be my choice for a video camera, it's still pretty damn capable, and it's definitely more capable than other cameras in its price range on the used market. I had the G9 at the same time I had the Lumix GH5, and I used them together and they worked really well together. The GH5 was my A cam for video, doing most of the talking head work and most of the A-roll, and the G9 was great for B-roll and getting photos on these video shoots. So, when revisiting the G9, I set out to answer the important question, is it worth buying considering its age? And the answer is, it depends. As good as the camera is for the price, the elephant in the room is that micro four thirds sensor. Some people love it, and some people hate it. Personally, I appreciate it. I think it helped push other manufacturers to include things like 10-bit color and faster burst rates into larger sensor cameras, but in today's world, a lot of the benefits that micro four thirds had aren't limited to micro four thirds anymore. So if you're debating between a used G9 and something in the similar price range, like the Canon R50, the Sony a6400, or the Fuji X-T32, I think I'd lean towards one of those. Obviously, each of these are going to have their own pros and cons, but I think I can live with the cons of those cameras more than I can live with the cons of the G9. Obviously, what you're photographing will help you justify which camera to pick, but unless you're shooting in really good lighting conditions outside, then I choose one of the other cameras I just mentioned over the G9. Not only will you get better, if not similar performance, you'll also be joining a lens mount that has more room for you to grow into rather than micro four thirds, which is kind of stagnant. That being said, if you're committing to the G9 with no big plans to upgrade or switch systems and want a solid camera where you can get smaller, lighter, cheaper lenses and more range out of those lenses, then maybe the G9 is for you. So basically, entry-level wildlife shooters should really consider the G9. So will you be picking up a Lumix G9? Let me know down below. For now, go out and shoot some photos. Thanks for watching.